The sea does not give up its dead easily, nor does it freely surrender its secrets. For all our modern technology, for all our satellites that map its surface, and our submersibles that plumb its depths, the ocean remains the last great wilderness on our planet. It is a realm of immense power and profound, enduring mystery. And from this realm, tales have emerged for as long as humans have dared to venture upon it. Tales of monsters, tales of mermaids, and perhaps most unsettling of all, tales of the ghost ship. The image is etched into our collective consciousness, a vessel, majestic and silent, sailing with the tide, its sails tattered or perhaps perfectly set, its decks empty. No crew at the helm, no lookout in the crow's nest. A ship without a soul, a floating tomb carrying a story it cannot tell. Of all the stories of derelict ships found adrift, from the famous Mary Celeste to the lesser-known legends, few are as baffling, as thoroughly investigated, and as stubbornly unresolved as the case of the Carroll Deering. It is a story that has everything: a magnificent ship, a troubled crew, strange final sightings, a government-level investigation, and even a connection to the world's most infamous stretch of water. It is one of the greatest American maritime mysteries, a true unsolved disappearance that begins, as so many of these stories do, on a desolate and windswept shore. Our story comes into focus on the morning of January 31st, 1921. The location is Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, a place known to mariners for centuries as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Here, the cold Labrador current collides with the warm Gulf Stream, creating a maelstrom of unpredictable weather, treacherous currents, and shifting sandbars known as the Diamond Shoals. It is a place that has claimed hundreds of ships and thousands of lives. On this particular morning, a surfman from the Cape Hatteras Coast Guard Station, one C.P. Brady, was scanning the horizon. The weather was foul, the seas too rough to launch a boat. Through the gloom and the spray, he saw something incredible. There, hard aground on the shoals, was a massive sailing ship. It was a 5-masted schooner, one of the largest and most impressive wooden sailing vessels ever built. Its sails were still set, catching the wind, giving it the eerie appearance of a ship still trying to sail, even as its keel was being broken on the sand. It was a magnificent, tragic sight. But the most chilling detail was the profound lack of life. There was no smoke from the galley chimney, no distress signals flying, and through his spyglass, Brady could see no one on deck. The ship was alone, abandoned to its fate. It would be 4 long days before the sea calmed enough for anyone to board her and discover the secrets she held and the secrets she had lost. The name on her bow, obscured but still visible, was Carroll Deering. The ghost ship of the Diamond Shoals had found its final resting place. To understand the mystery of her end, we must go back to her beginning. The Carroll Deering was a thing of beauty and power, a testament to the dying age of sail. She was built in 1919 in the shipyards of Bath, Maine, by the G.G. Deering Company, one of the last great builders of wooden schooners. She was enormous for her time, over 250 feet long, with 5 towering masts designed to carry a vast expanse of canvas. She was the pride of her builders, a strong, modern vessel designed for the cargo trade. But her life would be short, and her final voyage would seal her place in legend. In August of 1920, the Deering was chartered for a routine commercial voyage. She was to sail from Norfolk, Virginia, to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, with a full cargo of over 3,000 tons of coal. Her captain was William H. Merritt, a 66-year-old veteran of the sea, a man respected for his skill and experience. His son, Sewell Merritt, was to be his first mate. It was a solid, reliable command. However, before the voyage even began, fate intervened. Captain Merritt suddenly fell ill. He was forced to relinquish his command. The G.G. Deering Company had to find replacements, and they did so quickly. They hired a new captain, a 66-year-old retired mariner named Willis T. Wormel. He was also a veteran with decades of experience, but he had been off the sea for some time. To be his first mate, the company hired a man named Charles B. McClellan. And here, the first seeds of potential trouble were sown. The crew, a mix of 9 Scandinavians and African Americans, was now under the command of 2 men who had not chosen each other. Captain Wormel was known to be a stern, if fair, man. McClellan, on the other hand, had a reputation. He was reportedly a heavy drinker and had a difficult personality. Furthermore, Captain Wormel was not just a stranger to the crew, he was a stranger to the ship. A vessel of this size has its own quirks, its own personality, that only time at sea can teach a captain. Wormel was stepping onto a new ship, with a new crew, and a first mate he did not know. The delicate chemistry of a ship's command had been unsettled from the very start. The Carroll Deering departed from Norfolk on August 22, 1920. The journey south was largely uneventful. The ship performed well, and they arrived in Rio de Janeiro on time, delivering their cargo of coal as planned. It was during the layover in Rio that the first concrete evidence of trouble on board emerged. Another American sea captain, a man named Henry Goodwin, was in port at the same time, commanding a steamship called the SS Hewitt. Goodwin later reported that he had met Captain Wormel in Rio. Wormel, he said, was deeply unhappy. He complained bitterly about his first mate, McClellan, and the rest of the crew. He stated that he couldn't trust them, that McClellan was incompetent, and that he'd had to discipline him. Wormel felt that the crew was not giving him the respect a captain deserved, and he was anxious about the long voyage home. This was not just idle gossip. It was a captain expressing a serious lack of confidence in his own command, thousands of miles from home. Despite his misgivings, the business of the sea had to continue. The Carroll Deering departed from Rio on December 2, 1920. She was sailing in ballast, meaning she had no heavy cargo, making her ride high in the water and more susceptible to the whims of the wind and waves. Her destination was back to Norfolk. The next port of call was a brief stop for supplies in Barbados in early January 1921. It was here that the simmering conflict on board the Deering boiled over into public view. First Mate McClellan went ashore, got drunk, and was arrested by the local police for being loud and disorderly. While in custody, he reportedly boasted to his cellmate that the old man, meaning Captain Wormel, didn't know how to handle the ship, and that he, McClellan, was the one really in charge of sailing it. Captain Wormel had to go to the authorities and personally bail his first mate out of jail. It was a humiliating and deeply unprofessional incident. As Wormel was leaving the police station, another American captain overheard him say, in a moment of fury and frustration, "I'll get him before we get to Norfolk." It's a chilling phrase, thick with ambiguity. Was it a threat of violence? Or was it simply a promise to fire McClellan and see him blacklisted from the sea as soon as they reached home? We will never know. But it is a stark confirmation that the relationship between the 2 most important men on the ship had completely broken down. Captain Wormel had forgiven McClellan, or at least, he had let him back on the ship. On January 9th, the Carroll Deering left Barbados and sailed north into mystery. For the next 2.5 weeks, the ship was a ghost, unheard from. Then, on January 23rd, she was sighted passing the Cape Fear lightship in North Carolina. The contact was routine, and nothing seemed amiss. The Deering was on the final leg of her journey, nearing home. The last time anyone is known to have seen or spoken to the crew of the Carroll Deering was on the afternoon of January 28, 1921. It is the most enigmatic and crucial moment in the entire saga. The ship was hailed by the keeper of the Cape Lookout lightship, Captain Thomas Jacobson. A lightship is a floating lighthouse, anchored in a dangerous spot to guide other vessels. The Deering passed close by, and a man on her deck called out to Jacobson. The details of this encounter are bizarre. The man who hailed the lightship was described as a tall, thin man with reddish hair and a foreign accent, possibly Scandinavian. He was not Captain Wormel or First Mate McClellan. He told Jacobson that the Deering had lost both of its anchors in a storm off Cape Fear and asked him to report this to the shipping company. This, in itself, was not unusual. Losing anchors in a storm was a serious, but not catastrophic event. But it was the other details that Jacobson noted that were so strange. Jacobson observed that the crew of the Deering were not performing their duties. Instead, they were milling about on the foredeck, an area of the ship where they had no business being, unless they were being assembled for some reason. The man at the helm seemed to be steering the ship erratically. The overall impression was one of poor discipline and a lack of proper command. Captain Jacobson felt that something was profoundly wrong, but there was little he could do. The Deering was still under sail and moving on. He watched as she sailed north into the approaching dusk and the gathering storms of Cape Hatteras. It was the last he or anyone would ever see of her crew of 11 men. Just 3 days later, her battered hull was found on the Diamond Shoals. Let us return to that scene of discovery. For 4 days, the Coast Guard could only watch from the shore as the waves crashed over the stranded vessel. When the seas finally calmed on February 4th, a salvage crew was able to board the wreck. What they found was a scene of eerie, perplexing order. The ship was utterly deserted. There was no sign of the 11 men who had been her crew. In the ship's galley, pots and pans were on the stove, and food had been laid out, as if in preparation for the next meal. In the captain's quarters, they found a pair of his boots, but most of his personal effects, along with the ship's logbook, chronometer, and navigational charts, were gone. This was significant. A ship's log is its official diary. A chronometer is its most vital tool for determining longitude. The fact that they were missing suggested the crew had not abandoned ship in a panic. They had left in an orderly fashion, taking the most important items with them. The 2 lifeboats were also missing, reinforcing the theory of an orderly abandonment. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of violence, no bloodstains, no damage to the ship other than what had been inflicted by the relentless pounding of the waves on the shoal. The only living thing found on board was the ship's 6-toed cat, which the crew had named Deering. It was hungry but alive. The ship was a blank slate. The crew had vanished, and the only witness, the ship itself, was telling a contradictory story. The missing lifeboats and navigational gear pointed to an orderly departure, but the set sails and the meal in the galley suggested a sudden interruption. It was an unsolved disappearance in its purest form. The American government launched one of the most extensive investigations in maritime history. No fewer than 5 government departments became involved: Commerce, Treasury, Justice, Navy, and State. The investigation was personally overseen by Lawrence Ritchie, a top aide to the then Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover, who would later become president. The mystery of the Carroll Deering was now a national concern. A flurry of theories emerged, each attempting to explain the inexplicable. The first and most obvious theory was mutiny. This was the government's initial line of inquiry. The evidence was compelling. There was the known conflict between Captain Wormell and First Mate McClellan. There were Wormell's complaints in Rio and McClellan's drunken insubordination in Barbados. There was the strange final sighting at Cape Lookout, with a non-officer hailing the lightship and the crew milling about, a classic sign that the normal hierarchy of command had broken down. The theory went that McClellan, perhaps with the help of the crew, had overthrown Captain Wormell. They had then taken to the lifeboats, either to try and make it to shore or to be picked up by another vessel, and had perished in the storm that followed. It's a plausible narrative, but it has holes. Why abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship, even one without anchors, so close to home? And if they did make it to shore, where were they? Not a single body or piece of wreckage from the lifeboats was ever found. The second theory, and one that captured the public imagination at the time, was piracy. This might sound outlandish to us today, but in the early 1920s, it was a real fear. The aftermath of World War I and the Russian Revolution had left the seas in a state of turmoil. There were whispers of Bolshevik pirates preying on commercial shipping. More locally, Prohibition had just begun in the United States, and the illegal trade in alcohol was creating a new and ruthless class of criminal, the rum runner. Perhaps the Deering had been intercepted by pirates or rum runners who killed the crew and scuttled the ship, only for it to drift onto the shoals instead of sinking. The main problem with this theory is one of motive. The Deering was carrying no cargo of value. There was nothing to steal. And why would pirates leave the ship afloat? It makes little sense. The third theory is the most straightforward. The forces of nature. The Deering was lost in the graveyard of the Atlantic during a period of violent storms. Perhaps the story is as simple as this. Battered by a hurricane, having lost her anchors, the ship became unmanageable. The crew, seeing the shoals ahead and knowing the ship was doomed, made a desperate, last-ditch attempt to save themselves in the lifeboats, only to be swamped and drowned by the colossal waves. This theory has the virtue of simplicity, but it doesn't quite fit the evidence. The ship's condition to set sails, the prepared meal to speak of a crew in a panic, fighting for their lives against a storm. It suggests something else happened first. And this brings us to the fourth and most enduringly popular category of explanation, the paranormal. The disappearance of the Carroll Deering is a cornerstone case in the lore of the Bermuda Triangle theories. While Cape Hatteras is not technically inside the loosely defined boundaries of the triangle, it is close enough, and the nature of the mystery fits the pattern perfectly. Proponents of this theory point to the strange atmospheric conditions, the sudden, unexplained disappearance of a crew from a sound vessel. They also point to a chilling coincidence. Remember Captain Goodwin of the SS Hewitt, the man who heard Captain Wormel's complaints in Rio? His ship, the Hewitt, also vanished without a trace, with all 42 hands, in the same region and at the very same time as the Deering. Was there some connection? Did both ships fall victim to the same mysterious force, be it a massive, undetected rogue wave, a sudden waterspout, or something even stranger? The U.S. government even briefly considered the possibility that both ships had been targeted by a Soviet submarine, though no evidence ever supported this. The Bermuda Triangle explanation provides a neat, if supernatural, box to put the mystery in, but it is, by its very nature, beyond proof. The investigation continued for months, turning up nothing but dead ends. And then, in April of 1921, came a tantalizing and dramatic clue. A message in a bottle washed ashore near the same area where the Deering was found. The note inside was a frantic scrawl. It read, "Deering captured by oil-burning boat something like chaser. Taking off everything, crew getting off in small boat. Looks like crew are murdered. Signed, C.B. McClellan." It was a bombshell. The note seemed to confirm the piracy theory and suggested a dark fate for the crew. The handwriting was even examined by McClellan's widow, who confirmed it looked like her husband's. For a moment, it seemed the mystery was solved. But upon closer examination by federal agents, the truth came out. The message was a forgery. The man who claimed to have found the bottle, a fisherman from a nearby town, had written it himself, hoping for fame or a reward. It was a cruel hoax, a final, confusing chapter in a story already full of them. With all leads exhausted, the government officially closed the case in late 1922. The final report concluded that the Deering was likely lost as a result of the hurricane-force storms that swept the coast, but admitted that the complete disappearance of the crew could not be definitively explained. The mystery was left unsolved. The ship itself became a local landmark and a tourist attraction. For years, its skeletal remains sat on the Diamond Shoals, a stark monument to its lost crew. Salvage crews picked it apart, and the relentless sea did the rest. By the end of 1925, the last vestiges of the Carroll Deering had slipped beneath the waves, taking their secrets with them. So, what are we left with? We are left with a perfect mystery. A story with so many plausible paths, none of which leads to a satisfactory destination. Was it a mutiny that went wrong? Was it a freak storm that claimed the crew but spared the ship? Was it something stranger, a dark encounter with pirates, or a brush with forces we do not understand? The Carroll Deering has become a blank canvas upon which we can paint our deepest fears of the sea. It is a testament to the fact that even in our modern, well-documented world, a ship and its crew can still sail over the horizon and simply vanish, leaving behind only questions, legends, and the endless, whispering sound of the waves. Thank you for listening to this exploration of one of America's greatest maritime mysteries. Which theory do you find most compelling? The human drama of a mutiny, the raw power of a storm, or the unsettling possibility of something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you appreciate these journeys into the heart of historical enigmas, please consider subscribing and sharing our channel. Your support is what enables us to continue unearthing these lost stories. Until next time, sleep well. End of script.